everybody, it's Ebony Love, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to make this Scrappy apple core table runner using your AccuQuilt Go or Studio die cutter. Stay tuned! As some of you probably know from watching my videos, I love scraps. I love cutting scraps, I love sewing scraps, I love saving scraps. This is an example of one of my scrap bins. This is my 2-inch scrap bin, and there's so many scraps in here that I can hardly even close the drawer. And when I can't close a scrap drawer, to me that's a sign that I need to sew something. So I came up with this Scrappy table runner that I'm going to talk to you about how to make. Now, traditional apple cores are cut from single pieces of fabric, and if you look on the AccuQuilt site or search the internet, you're going to see an apple core shape that looks like this, that's cut from a single piece of fabric. But I like to make and add a little interest and make scrappy apple cores. So if you have the Studio cutter or the Go, this is the Studio die for the apple core. So you can see this is one large shape, and the piece of fabric that would fit over this particular die is 6 inches wide by 7.5 inches long. So in order to make a scrappy apple core, I need to keep that measurement in mind and make sure that my scraps are going to cover that shape die. So what I did is I took 2-inch strips, so just 2-inch strips, and just randomly attached them to each other in my scrap bin. And I take 5 of those strips, and 5 2-inch strips across will finish to 7.5 inches wide, so that's perfect. And then I just subcut these strips into 6-inch lengths. So I end up with squares that are this size. The next thing that I did is I just layered, and oh, by the way, when I do these scrap projects, I press my seams open. And that is to help reduce bulk, not only while you're cutting, but also when you're sewing these shapes together. So I would then place multiple pieces, and on my Studio cutter I can cut up to 5 of these. And the reason that I only cut 5 is because I have seams, and those seam allowances pressed open adds another layer of fabric. So that's something to keep in mind on your Go cutter as well, that you may only be able to cut 3 of these at a time because those seam allowances will give you 6 layers of fabric in some places. So what you would do is just layer those pieces over your die, aligning them with the registration lines that you've drawn. Put your mat on top and run them through your cutter. And for this shape, because of the curved shapes, you don't really need to angle this in the cutter because the curves will make sure that you're only cutting a little bit of each blade at a time as it rolls through the cutter. So what you'll end up getting after these come off of the cutter are scrappy apple shapes that look like this. Now the thing to keep in mind here, that I try to keep in mind, I don't foundation piece these because the foundation adds yet another layer to this, and it also prevents the fabric from giving where it needs to. So whenever I do these, even though you don't have to use the same width of strips throughout, it actually looks kind of cool if you mix up the strip length. What you do want to make sure is that at least on the outside you have a single strip that forms this curve on the outside. And the reason for that is because this curve is on the bias, and when you're stitching these you need that to stretch, so you don't want seams on these outside edges. So if you need different size strips, just make sure that those different size strips are in the center and not, and you don't end up with seams on the very outside when you cut. You'll also want to cut some regular solid apple cores, and that's what really adds interest to this particular runner, is by mixing the scrappy apple core shapes with the solids. So after you cut those, you can then stitch them together normally, and when you're stitching these you want the curve shape on top and you'll stitch it to the shape with the inside curve. So always stitch with the rounded curve on top, and that's what you can use to guide through as you're sewing. And if you want to learn a technique for stitching these without pins, check out my Rob Peter to Pay Paul check out my Rob Peter to Pay Paul video number 2 in the series, which shows you how to sew curved shapes without pins. And then once you do that, you just you can make this size runner any size you want. This technique also works with other shapes like the tumbler. You could do that with, and even Drunkard's Path, it could work with that too. So you could come up with some really cool projects by essentially making scrap fabric first and then cutting it to size. And then to bind this project, I used binding that's cut on the bias, and if you want to learn how to cut binding on the bias using your AccuQuilt cutter, there's a video for that too. So check out my YouTube channel, it's LoveBug Studios, or my website at quiltpossible.com. Happy quilting!